I thought moving into a quiet Florida neighborhood would finally give my wife and me some peace. Palm trees, clean lawns, neighbors waving from their driveways. It looked perfect. But on one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. My wife, Sarah, was outside tending the garden when she found a bright yellow HOA violation notice taped to our fence. At first it seemed like the usual nonsense. Our fence was apparently 2 inches too tall, and the flag we flew wasn't approved. But that slip of paper was just the first domino. Within hours, 2 so-called compliance officers in cheap tactical vests stormed across my lawn, barking orders and flashing fake badges. When one of them slapped Sarah across the face, I knew this wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was warned they had no idea who they had just picked a fight with. The morning started like any other in our neighborhood. The sun was already blazing, Florida heat settling in, even though it wasn't even 9 a.m. yet. I stood by the kitchen window, coffee steaming in my hand, watching Sarah in the yard. She loved her garden more than anything: roses, hibiscus, and even a stubborn patch of tomatoes she'd been fighting against the sandy soil to grow. She had her old white teaching shirt on, the one already smeared with dirt from kneeling in the flower beds. That's when I saw her pause. She leaned closer to the fence, plucked something off the wood, and froze. Even from the window, I recognized the neon yellow slip of paper. I stepped outside just as she read it aloud, her voice tight with frustration. Violation. Fence height exceeds approved measurement. 2 inches above regulation. Unauthorized flag display. Compliance required. Within 72 hours. I almost laughed. 2 inches, that was their crime of the week. A fence barely taller than regulation, and an American flag flying proudly in the breeze. Sarah crumpled the notice in her fist, her knuckles turning white. Unbelievable, she muttered. I spend hours teaching kids every day. I come home to relax in my garden, and these people want to nitpick fence posts and flags. I sipped my coffee, the bitter taste sharp against my tongue, and shook my head. Honestly, 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan felt less oppressive than this HOA does. Sarah looked at me, the corner of her mouth twitching like she wanted to laugh but couldn't. She knew I wasn't joking. Out there, at least the rules made sense. Out there, I knew who the enemy was. Here, it was hidden behind polite smiles, manicured lawns, and HOA newsletters printed in pastel colors. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the notice. Document everything, she said, mostly to herself. That was the teacher in her, always organized, always prepared. If there was going to be a fight, she wanted proof. I admired that about her, but I also hated it, because deep down I knew this wasn't going to be the end of it. The yellow notice wasn't just a warning, it was bait, a test, and the people behind it were waiting to see how we'd react. The air felt heavier than usual, like the humidity wasn't just weather, but something pressing in around us. I could hear sprinklers clicking on down the street, dogs barking faintly in the distance, and the faint hum of a lawnmower a few houses away. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. But in that moment, I felt the same tension I used to feel before a mission when the world looked calm on the outside. But you knew trouble was about to break through the surface. Sarah turned the paper over in her hands, then stuffed it into her pocket. We'll fight it, she said, determination flashing in her eyes. I nodded slowly. Yeah, but let's be smart. Something tells me this isn't just about fences. She tilted her head, curious. But before I could explain the uneasy feeling growing in my gut, movement caught my eye. 2 figures, dressed in dark vests, walking fast across our lawn like they owned it. Their steps were heavy, deliberate, and wrong. I narrowed my eyes and set my coffee cup on the porch railing. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to end with a simple conversation about fence posts. I didn't recognize them at first. 2 men, walking fast across the lawn like they were storming a target, their cheap tactical vests reflecting the morning sun. The patches on their chests read compliance officer, and their shiny plastic badges caught the light just enough to look official. If you didn't know what you were looking at, but I'd seen real gear, real tactical uniforms, and these knockoffs screamed amateur hour. Sarah noticed them a second later. She still had the violation notice in her pocket, her phone clutched tight in her hand. Instinct kicked in. She lifted the camera and hit record without hesitation. Ma'am, stop recording, the taller one barked. His voice had that forced rasp, like he was trying too hard to sound like a drill sergeant. The other, broader and heavier, flexed his arms like he thought intimidation was part of the job description. They looked more like guys you'd see at a strip mall security job than professionals. And yet, here they were, walking into my yard as if they had legal authority. Sarah didn't flinch. She held her phone steady and said, "This is my property. You have no right to order me to stop recording." The tall one, Vince I'd later learn his name, stepped closer, pointing a finger at her like a teacher scolding a child. "You've already been warned about your violations. If you don't comply, there will be consequences." I stayed still, leaning against the porch railing, sipping the last of my coffee. My body was calm, but inside, my pulse was steady and sharp, the way it always got before things went sideways. Sarah's voice cut through. strong as ever. Consequences. For a fence post and a flag. That's when the other one, Tony, stepped in. He didn't say a word. He just lifted his hand and slapped her across the face hard. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Her phone went tumbling into the grass, still recording. The camera catching the sky and the edge of his boots. For a split second, the world stopped. My wife stood there, stunned, a bright red mark already blooming on her cheek. She blinked hard, not from tears but from sheer shock. Then her eyes burned with fury. I felt the fury too, but mine was something deeper, controlled, focused. These idiots had no idea what line they had just crossed. I set my empty mug down on the porch railing and stepped forward. My Marine Corps t-shirt clung to my shoulders, jeans plain and unassuming. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You just assaulted my wife, I said evenly, my tone calm but sharp as a knife. This is your last warning. Stand down. Hands where I can see them, Vince sneered. He mistook calm for weakness. Or what? You'll report us to the HOA, he taunted. He lunged at me like he thought brute force would win the day. But he wasn't trained. His foot caught on the bottom step of my porch, and he went sprawling face first into the wood. I heard the crunch of cartilage, his nose breaking clean on impact. Tony, furious and clumsy, swung at me with a wide haymaker. I sidestepped easily, his momentum carrying him off balance. He stumbled straight into the sprinkler head, which cracked against his jaw with a sickening pop. His scream turned into incoherent mumbling as he clawed at his face, his jaw clearly dislocated. I didn't even have to lift a hand. Their own incompetence did the work for me. Sarah picked up her phone, her face flushed but steady, recording every second of the chaos. Her teacher instincts were ironclad. Document. I stood over the two men, both groaning in pain, and repeated my warning, this time with finality. Hands where I can see them. Don't move. Help is on the way. Because I already knew what came next. This wasn't just about two fake cops making a bad decision. Someone had sent them, and I was going to find out who. Vince was still groaning on the porch steps, blood streaming from his nose, while Tony sat in the grass holding his jaw at an angle no human face should ever bend. The sprinkler hissed behind him, water spraying in random arcs, soaking his cheap tactical vest. I didn't raise my voice, but the weight behind my words left no room for misunderstanding. Don't move. Either of you. I'd used that tone before on foreign soil, in places where hesitation meant someone didn't make it home. And just like then, it worked. Vince froze, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pain. Tony tried to mumble something, but with his jaw hanging loose. It came out like garbled nonsense. Sarah stood a few feet away, still recording. Her cheek was red and swollen, her hand shaking slightly, but her eyes were steady. She looked at me, then at the two men sprawled in our yard, and said firmly, "It's all on video." Every second. That was when it really hit me. This wasn't a random HOA warning gone too far. These two clowns hadn't just wandered over on a power trip. They'd been sent. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, keeping my voice measured. As I reported the assault, two men, posing as compliance officers, attacked my wife. Both need medical attention. Send law enforcement and EMS. While I spoke, my eyes stayed locked on them. Years of training don't just fade you. Never let potential threats out of your sight. Even to guys this incompetent could still be dangerous. If they decided desperation was worth a last swing, when the call was done, I crouched just enough to grab Vince's phone where it had landed in the grass. The screen was cracked, but still lit up, and right there, glowing in bold letters, was a message that sent my stomach into a cold knot. Boss lady, use force if needed. K. Time-stamped less than 2 minutes before these two stormed into my yard. I turned the phone towards Sarah so her camera could capture it. You see this? I asked, my voice low. Her eyes widened. She nodded. Proof. Absolute proof. The neighborhood was starting to stir now. Curtains moved. Mrs. Lee peeked out from her living room window. Phone pressed against her ear. Mr. Carter, the guy from 3 houses down, stepped outside holding a wrench like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to help or protect himself. Mrs. Gomez froze with her watering can midair, watching the whole scene unfold like it was the evening news. I didn't blame them. This was the kind of thing you expect to see in some gritty crime drama, not on a manicured suburban street lined with palm trees and HOA-approved flower beds. Vince groaned again, trying to push himself up, but I shut him down instantly. Stay down. That's not a request. He obeyed. That told me everything I needed to know about their training or lack thereof. Real professionals would have fought tooth and nail. These guys folded at the first sign of resistance, which meant they weren't real law enforcement. They weren't even competent hired security. They were cheap muscle, and someone, somewhere, had decided to point them at my wife. The sirens started faint in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Red and blue lights flashed across the street a minute later, the kind of sight that usually means relief. For me, it just meant round one was over, because I already knew this wasn't the end. If Kay was willing to send 2 goons onto my property in broad daylight, what else was she willing to do behind the scenes? As the cops pulled up, I leaned close to Sarah. Keep that video safe. This is bigger than just us. And it's not over yet. The cops arrived fast, but not fast enough to erase what I'd already seen on Vince's phone. That text sat there on the cracked screen like a glowing piece of evidence waiting to explode the whole story open. Boss lady. Use force if needed. I'd been in combat zones where coded messages and burner phones meant life or death, and this one, in its sloppy, bold simplicity, told me two things. First, these men weren't acting on impulse. Second, they weren't working alone. The officers stepped out of their cruiser, cautious but skeptical. Two guys in tactical vests, lying groaning on my lawn, didn't exactly look like victims, but protocol meant they had to sort it out. Sarah walked straight up to them, phone still rolling, her swollen cheek in full view. They came onto our property, she said firmly, holding her phone out. They told me to stop recording, and then he hit me. Her voice didn't crack once. That's Sarah steady, even when she's hurting. One of the officers nodded and took the phone to review the footage. The moment Tony's hand connected with her face, the whole mood shifted. The skepticism drained, replaced by quiet, professional tension. Meanwhile, I crouched by Vince, who was still holding his nose, blood dripping between his fingers. Who's Kay? I asked calmly. His eyes darted, panicked. He didn't answer. That silence told me more than words. I stood and handed the cracked phone to the officer. You'll want to see this. A message sent less than 2 minutes before the assault. The cop squinted at the screen, lips pressed tight. We'll log it into evidence. I nodded, but inside I was already making my own plans. Evidence meant paperwork, red tape, and waiting. I'd lived through enough operations to know waiting around for the system to move wasn't always an option. Whoever Kay was, they were willing to escalate quickly. The paramedics hauled Vince and Tony onto stretchers, their groans filling the quiet morning. Neighbors crowded closer now, curiosity outweighing caution. Mrs. Gomez whispered to Mrs. Lee, both of them staring at Sarah's bruised face. Mr. Carter stood at the edge of his driveway, arms folded, eyes darting between me and the cops like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. I scanned the crowd. People were scared, but not just of the two idiots getting carted away. No, there was something else in their faces, a knowledge, like they'd seen this play out before, in smaller, quieter ways. Fines, warnings, threats. This time, it had gone physical. But maybe it wasn't the first time the HOA had overstepped. The cops wrapped up their questions quickly. They promised follow-ups, but I'd played this game long enough to know we'd be hearing the phrase, under investigation for weeks. And in the meantime, Sarah and I would be left with a target on our backs. When the last cruiser pulled away and the flashing lights disappeared down the street, the neighborhood seemed to exhale, but my chest stayed tight. Sarah came up beside me, pressing an ice pack from the paramedics against her cheek. We're not letting this slide, she said quietly. I put an arm around her shoulders. We won't. Whoever Kay is, we're going to find them. Because this wasn't random. You don't send two men onto a family's property unless you think you've got power, unless you believe you're untouchable. And in my experience, the ones who think they're untouchable are always hiding something worth tearing down. Night, while Sarah rested, I sat at our kitchen table with Vince's message burned into my memory. I opened my laptop, pulled up a fresh document, and typed a single letter at the top of the page. The next morning, I woke up with that text burned into my skull. Boss lady, use force, if needed. Who the HLL signs off an order like that with a single letter? K. I couldn't shake it. I'd seen too many ops in my Delta days, where a simple initial lead to an entire network unraveling. One letter can topple an empire if you pull the right thread. Sarah was still sleeping, her face bruised but calmer. I kissed her forehead, made a promise in silence, and stepped outside. That's when Ray found me. He was leaning against his truck, coffee in hand, baseball cap low over his eyes. He was ex-army too. Different branch, different battles, but the same smell of war clung to both of us. You planning to hunt ghosts alone? He asked, tossing me a second cup. I caught it without thinking. Not ghosts, just one letter. Ray's eyes narrowed. You mean Kay that stopped me? How do you know about that? He shrugged. Word spreads fast. Half the neighborhood saw the cops bag Vince's phone. Everyone's whispering about that message. So it wasn't just my fight anymore. The whole block was buzzing, but nobody wanted to say the quiet part out loud, that the HOA wasn't just a board of grumpy retirees nagging about lawn height. Something darker was pulling strings. Ray leaned closer, lowering his voice. You should talk to Mrs. Porter. She's been here longer than anyone. Knows every face, every story. Some folks think she's just a lonely old widow, but I've heard things like she kept receipts. Actual paper files. Receipts. That word was gold. By mid-afternoon, I was standing on Mrs. Porter's porch. She was in her 70s, tiny but sharp-eyed, wearing a floral dress that looked like it had seen the Reagan era. When she opened the door, her gaze flicked past me, scanning the street before motioning me inside. You came because of the letter, she said. No greeting, no hesitation. That chilled me more than I'd admit. Her house smelled like old books and lavender. Stacks of boxes lined the hallway, each one labeled with dates in neat handwriting. She shuffled to a corner and pulled out a thin binder, slapping it onto the coffee table like it weighed 100 pounds. I've been keeping track since '98, she said. Every fine, every dispute, every so-called incident. People laugh at me, call me paranoid. But I knew this day would come. I flipped open the binder. Inside were copies of letters, notes from meetings, even screenshots of emails. But what caught my eye was a section titled, Special Committee. These aren't elected board members, she explained, pointing to a list of names. They meet off the record, call themselves the Enforcement Council. Always one person. At the top, always changing every couple of years. But the signature, that's constant. I leaned closer. There it was, scribbled at the bottom of multiple documents. A single letter, K. It hit me like a sniper's bullet. This wasn't some random abbreviation. This was a shadow leader, someone hiding behind an initial while pulling the strings of every so-called enforcement action in our neighborhood. Mrs. Porter lowered her voice. People move away or shut up when they cross you and your wife. You won't be the first. Her words weren't a warning. They were a prophecy. I closed the binder and looked her dead in the eye. Then it's time someone crossed them back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mrs. Porter's words looped in my head like a broken record. You won't be the first. Lying. In the dark, I listened to the hum of the AC and Sarah's steady breathing beside me. My instincts wouldn't let me rest. Every sound outside, the rustle of palm fronds, the bark of a dog 2 streets over, felt like the prelude to something ugly. In Afghanistan, I'd slept on gravel under mortar fire, but here, in a neat little Florida suburb, my gut was telling me the battlefield had just shifted. By morning, the whole neighborhood felt different. The tension wasn't in my imagination. People were watching us, not openly, but in the way curtains swayed when I walked outside, in how lawnmowers shut off the second I passed by. Fear had a smell, and I could taste it in the air. I decided to test it. On my morning walk, I stopped by Carter's house, the man who always kept his yard trimmed to perfection. He was outside, wiping sweat off his forehead, his hands shaking as he fumbled with his hedge clippers. Morning, I said. He flinched, looked at me like a cornered animal, then forced a weak smile. Hey, how's Sarah? She's tough, she heal. I paused, studying him. His eyes darted toward his porch, then the street. You know something, Carter, don't you? His jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he'd spill, but then he muttered, I don't want trouble, and practically bolted inside, door slamming shut behind him. Trouble, that word again. Trouble for telling the truth. Trouble for crossing K. I wasn't buying it. Carter wasn't just afraid, he was owned. Later, Ray swung by, his Hawaiian shirt clashing with the grim look on his face. He tossed a folder onto my table. Inside were property records, HOA financial statements, and a list of payouts that didn't add up. Karen's name is all over this, he said. President of the board for 6 years. But these side payments? They don't go through HOA channels. They're funneled to private accounts, shell companies. My pulse quickened. And you think she's K? Ray shook his head. She's too sloppy. Karen loves control, but she's not smart enough to cover her tracks like this. If I had to guess, she's a face, a mouthpiece. Kay's the one pulling her strings. Still, the more I thought about it, the more it fit. Karen was the queen bee of our block, always buzzing about rules, fines, and protecting neighborhood values. But that binder from Mrs. Porter showed something deeper and organized effort. Karen might not be Kay, but she was definitely part of the council. That evening, Sarah and I took a slow walk around the block. She wore sunglasses to hide her bruise, but I could see the fire burning in her eyes. Every neighbor we passed gave us the same look, pity mixed with fear. Mrs. Gomez stopped watering her plants the second she saw us, muttering something about keeping her head down. Finally, Sarah whispered, Why is everyone acting like we're radioactive? Because they've been trained to, I said quietly. Fear's a leash, and Karen's been yanking it for years. As if on cue, Karen herself appeared at the end of the street, strutting like she owned the pavement. She waved at us, that fake HOA smile plastered on her face, but her eyes were cold, calculating. Good evening, she chirped. I do hope the situation yesterday won't sour your view of our community. We pride ourselves on order. Sarah squeezed my hand so tight my knuckles cracked. I forced a smile. Funny, order's one word for it. Karen's gaze flicked to Sarah's cheek, lingered for just a second, then slid back to me. Oh, accidents. Happen sometimes, people. Escalate. Best to let things go, don't you think? That was it. Not a question. A warning. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You're not half as clever as you think you are. And sooner or later, Kay won't be able to hide behind you. Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, a crack. Small, but real. And in that crack, I saw the truth. She was scared. It was just after sunrise when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd ignore at most unknown calls. These days were spam, but something in my gut told me to pick up. Yeah, I answered, voice still rough. From sleep, a pause. Then a low, gravelly voice. You don't know me. Name's Greg. Used to be married to Karen. We need to talk. My body went still. Greg. The elusive name Ray had circled in his notes the night before. Karen's ex. Her shadow. What makes you think I want to talk to you? I asked, my hand tightening around the phone. Because, he said, you're the only one who's ever stood up to her. And because what she's planning next doesn't just involve you, it involves your wife. Your whole damn neighborhood. The line clicked. Dead, no goodbye. No address. Just silence. I sat there, staring at the phone, adrenaline burning through my veins. Sarah walked in, hair pulled back, coffee mug in hand. Who was that? Greg? I said simply. Her mug froze midair. Karen's ex, male one who, yeah, I cut in, and he wants to meet. Ray showed up 20 minutes later, flipping through a notebook as I relayed the call. He nodded grimly. Makes sense? They split in 2021. Divorced messy. From what I found, he's got military ties. To Marine Corps. Same as you. Maybe that's why he's reaching out now. Sarah crossed her arms. Or maybe it's a trap. Don't forget who his ex-wife is. For all we know, he's still on her payroll. I couldn't argue. The thought gnawed at me. But I also knew one thing. When a man like Greg calls, it's not small talk. We agreed on neutral ground. No backyards, no cul-de-sac. Denny's, 10 miles down the highway. Plenty of eyes, plenty of exits. Walking in, I spotted him immediately. He wasn't hard to miss, late 40s. Tall, broad shoulders that hadn't completely softened, but his limp told a story of old wounds. A faded Marine tattoo on his forearm peeked out from under his rolled-up sleeve. He looked like a man who'd seen too much and carried it all with him. He gestured to the booth across. From him, no smile, no small talk. You're the SEAL, I sat. That's me. Good, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Then you'll understand what this means. Inside were bank statements, printed emails, and half-scribbled notes. One email froze me, cold. Payment authorized. Community compliance. Group $1,500. Karen's name was right there in black and white. Your wife's assault, Greg said, tapping the page. Wasn't random. Karen ordered it. She called it a lesson for the military couple. She's obsessed with control, but it's not just HOA power games anymore. She's escalating. Sarah's face flashed in my mind, her cheeks swollen from that slap, the fire in her eyes. As she kept recording, my fists clenched under the table. Greg leaned closer, his voice dropping. She's working on something bigger. Phase 3, she called it. I don't have all the details, but it involves your wife's school. She's been talking about making an example out of military families. That means Sarah? That means kids? She's crossed a line. I stared at him, every muscle in my body tight. And why tell me this now? His jaw worked, eyes flicking down to the scar on his hand. Because I've been on the other side. Because I let her manipulate me for years, but this. Targeting kids, that's a red line. I may be her ex, but I'm not her accomplice anymore. I didn't fully trust him, but I believed the tremor in his voice. This wasn't just bitterness, this was fear. As I closed the folder, Greg muttered one last warning. Karen isn't acting alone. There's someone backing her, someone with resources. Kay isn't just Karen. Kay is bigger. He stood, dropped a 20 on the table, and limped out without looking back. I sat there, folder in hand, knowing one thing for certain. This war had just expanded, and Karen was no longer just a neighborhood nuisance. She was a weapon pointed straight at my family. By the time the community meeting rolled around, the neighborhood was electric with tension. I could feel it the moment we stepped into the halt. Smiles, hushed whispers, and eyes darting nervously between the front of the room and each other. No one wanted to speak first. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one dared name names. Not yet. I slid into a chair beside Sarah. Her cheek was still tender, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. She gave me a small nod, her way of saying, "We're ready." Karen was there, of course, perched at the head of the table with that trademark smile plastered across her face. Her clipboard was pristine, pen poised like a weapon. She greeted the room with practiced charm. "I hope everyone has come to discuss how we can maintain order in our lovely neighborhood," she said, voice syrupy, each word a trap. The crowd murmured. Polite nods and sideways glances. I could feel the weight of the eyes around me, who had been quietly suffocating under fines, threats, and rules that seemed to exist only to assert control. I waited, letting Karen finish her opening spiel. Then, I cleared my throat. Standing slowly, all eyes shifted to me. "Yesterday," I began, "two individuals came onto my property. They assaulted my wife while pretending to enforce HOA regulations." A murmur ran through the room. Some gasps, some uneasy coughs. Karen's smile faltered for a split second, a crack in her armor, but she quickly recovered. "I have video evidence," I continued, pulling my phone from my pocket. "This isn't hearsay. This isn't rumor. This is real." I handed the device to Sarah, and she projected the footage for everyone to see. The moment Tony's hand connected with her cheek, the room went silent. Even Karen blinked. "That was not just a warning," I said, scanning the crowd. "It was intimidation. It was meant to show power, and it's part of a larger pattern." Mrs. Porter cleared her throat, standing beside me. "I've been documenting this for years. she said, her voice steady, despite the shivers I could see running down her spine. Fines, threats, secret payments. If everything goes through a network controlled by someone we've been calling K, and Karen is just the face we see. Heads turned, eyes narrowing. Some neighbors leaned forward, disbelief etched on their faces. Others looked down, shame and fear mixed with relief that someone was finally saying what they'd all been thinking. I gestured to the folder Greg had given me. We have proof of payments to outside groups, emails ordering harassment, and a list of fines that were deliberately manipulated to punish certain families. This is not about rules, it's about control. Her hands twitched. I noticed, almost subconsciously, the way she glanced at the nearest exit, calculating, but the room had shifted. People were no longer afraid to look her in the eyes. Mr. Carter, the neighbor who had flinched like a scared animal days before, cleared his throat. I was pressured to comply. Fines, threats, I didn't know what else to do. But I saw what they did yesterday. I was wrong to go along with it. His voice cracked, but the words were real. And in that moment, a dam broke. Other neighbors started talking small at first, then louder. $300 fines for flags, ridiculous landscaping orders, threats for minor disputes. One by one, people revealed the little tyrannies Karen had imposed, all documented and corroborated by Mrs. Porter's notes. Karen opened her mouth, probably to argue, but I cut her off with a calm, steady voice. This isn't about debate. This is about facts. The room had shifted from fear to anger, and for the first time, Karen looked like what she was, a manipulator exposed. As the meeting ended, murmurs of revolt buzzed through the hall. Plans for votes, investigations, and accountability were whispered in every corner. The first cracks in Karen's reign had appeared, and I knew this was only the beginning. The day of the vote arrived faster than I expected. Our neighborhood had transformed overnight. Where once there had been polite nods and forced smiles, now there was a restless energy, like a storm about to break. Families gathered in the community center, clutching papers, whispering in tight circles, and shooting nervous glances toward Karen, who sat at the head of the room, clipboard still in hand. Sarah and I took our seats near the front. She had her phone ready, not just for recording, but to project evidence if needed. Her bruise was healing, but her glare could still cut steel. I gave her a nod, silent agreement, that we'd see this through. Karen greeted the crowd with her usual practiced charm. I'm sure we all want what's best for our neighborhood, she said smoothly, and this vote will reflect that. But the confidence in her voice had a tremor, almost imperceptible. The evidence we'd presented, combined with the courage of neighbors speaking out, had already shifted the room. Karen knew it, even if she tried to hide it. I stood first. Let's be clear. This isn't about personal vendettas or opinions. This is about documented harassment, threats, and misuse of HOA funds. It's about people being intimidated and controlled. You have proof in front of you, you've seen it, and you've lived it. The murmurs grew louder, heads nodded, and for the first time, Karen's eyes darted nervously. She could see the momentum slipping away. Mrs. Porter spoke next, her voice calm but resolute. I've tracked fines, liens, and off-the-record payments for years. This isn't speculation. These are facts. We're not just fighting a single tyrant, we're dismantling a system she's used to manipulate us all. One by one, neighbors began sharing their stories. Mr. Lopez talked about absurd landscaping fines. Mrs. Gomez recounted threats over her holiday decorations. Even Mr. Carter, previously frozen with fear, stepped forward, shaking but honest. I allowed myself to be coerced, he admitted, voice breaking, but I see now how wrong it was. I support removing her from power. Karen tried to interject, her voice rising with false authority. This is all exaggerated. You don't know what you're voting on. But the room no longer listened to her. She had lost the trust that had sustained her. Every story, every piece of evidence, every brave confession chipped away at her authority. When the votes were finally cast, the tally was undeniable. 52 in favor of removing Karen, 1 against. A collective sigh of relief filled the room, but the air remained tense. Karen's face twisted in rage, her lips forming words she didn't dare say aloud. Phase 3. Even in victory, we knew she wasn't finished. The term had come up in Greg's warnings, whispered in the documents, and hinted at in her own erratic behavior. This wasn't just about HOA fines anymore. It was about escalation, and the next move would target something or someone much more vulnerable. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing it tightly. We did it, she said softly, her voice still laced with concern. We did, but she's not done, I replied, scanning the room. Our neighbors were smiling, some laughing nervously, but beneath it all was fear, the kind of fear that doesn't go away overnight. Karen stormed out, slamming the doors behind her, leaving the hall buzzing with whispers about what Phase 3 might mean. Even from a distance, I could sense the darkness she carried in unresolved. Threat lingering over us, ready to strike at the first opportunity. Ray caught up with us in the parking lot, his expression grim. Phase 3 targets schools, he said, lowering his voice. Public places, vulnerable people. We need to prepare. If she's willing to escalate this far, she won't stop at neighborhood politics. I nodded. feeling the weight of the next battle settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just about reclaiming control of an HOA anymore. It was about protecting my wife, my neighbors, and even the children in our community. Karen had been stripped of official authority, but her reach, that was still very real, and Phase 3 was coming. We left the hall with a mix of relief and dread, knowing that while we'd won the vote, the real fight was just beginning. We didn't have long to celebrate. Less than 24 hours after Karen was ousted, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a normal number. The message made my blood run cold. Your wife works at Sunset Elementary, right? Kids are vulnerable at 3:15 dismissal. A friend? I stared at the screen, heart hammering. Not just Sarah, not just our home. Now, innocent kids were potentially in the crosshairs. I called Sarah immediately. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. We've dealt with Karen's theatrics before. We can handle this, she said. But I knew it would take more than courage to protect the school. Ray was the first person I contacted. We've got a serious escalation, I told him. Phase 3, target, Sunset Elementary. Could be kids, could be staff. We don't know exactly what she's planning. He didn't flinch. Not the type to panic. We'll mobilize neighbors, volunteers, anyone we can trust. But this is beyond HOA nonsense. We're talking security measures now. Law enforcement included. I spent the next hour coordinating with Sarah and Ray. Neighbors offered their surveillance cameras, even plans to stand guard during pickup. Everyone was scared, yes, but they were also determined. The same fear that had kept them silent for years now fueled action. At the school, I met with the principal and the security team. We went over every entrance, every blind spot, every hallway that could be exploited. The administration was cooperative, but the tension was palpable. Teachers whispered in corners about strange people loitering outside, and parents had started calling in. Worried. Greg contacted me again, this time, in person. He limped into the school parking lot, folder in hand. I've dug into her communications, he said, eyes sharp. She's been planning this for months. Phase 3 isn't random. She wants visibility, she wants fear, and she has resources, people willing to follow orders without question. I frowned. People like the 2 idiots yesterday. Worse, Greg said. She's coordinated with others in the area. Some are professionals, some are wannabes. But all are dangerous if underestimated. Sarah and I went over evacuation plans with the school staff, marking escape routes, assigning teachers to specific posts, and reviewing emergency contacts. Every minute counted, I gestured to the folder Greg had given me. We have proof of payments to outside groups, emails ordering harassment, and a list of fines that were deliberately manipulated to punish certain families. This is not about rules, it's about control. Karen's hands twitched. I noticed, almost subconsciously, the way she glanced at the nearest exit, calculating, but the room had shifted. People were no longer afraid to look her in the eyes. Mr. Carter, the neighbor who had flinched like a scared animal days before, cleared his throat. I was pressured to comply. Fines, threats. I didn't know what else to do, but I saw what they did yesterday. I was wrong to go along with it. His voice cracked, but the words were real, and in that moment, a dam broke. Other neighbors started talking small at first, then louder. $300 fines for flags, ridiculous landscaping orders, threats for minor disputes. One by one, people revealed the little tyrannies Karen had imposed, all documented and corroborated by Mrs. Porter's notes. Karen opened her mouth, probably to argue, but I cut her off with a calm, steady voice. This isn't about debate, this is about facts. The room had shifted from fear to anger, and for the first time, Karen looked like what she was, a manipulator exposed. As the meeting ended, murmurs of revolt buzzed through the hall. Plans for votes, investigations, and accountability were whispered in every corner. The first cracks in Karen's reign had appeared, and I knew this was only the beginning. The day of the vote arrived faster than I expected. Our neighborhood had transformed overnight. Where once there had been polite nods and forced smiles, now there was a restless energy, like a storm about to break. Families gathered in the community center, clutching papers, whispering in tight circles, and shooting nervous glances toward Karen, who sat at the head of the room. Clipboard still in hand, Sarah and I took our seats near the front. She had her phone ready, not just for recording, but to project evidence if needed. Her bruise was healing, but her glare could still cut steel. I gave her a nod, silent agreement that we'd see this through. Karen greeted the crowd with her usual practiced charm. I'm sure we all want what's best for our neighborhood, she said smoothly, and this vote will reflect that. But the confidence in her voice had a tremor, almost imperceptible. The evidence we'd presented, combined with the courage of neighbors speaking out, had already shifted the room. Karen knew it, even if she tried to hide it. I stood first. Let's be clear. This isn't about personal vendettas or opinions. This is about documented harassment, threats, and misuse of HOA funds. It's about people being intimidated and controlled. You have proof in front of you. You've seen it, and you've lived it. The murmurs grew louder. Heads nodded. and for the first time Karen's eyes darted nervously. She could see the momentum slipping away. Mrs. Porter spoke next, her voice calm but resolute. I've tracked fines, liens, and off-the-record payments for years. This isn't speculation, these are facts. We're not just fighting a single tyrant, we're dismantling a system she's used to manipulate us all. One by one, neighbors began sharing their stories. Mr. Lopez talked about absurd landscaping fines. Mrs. Gomez recounted threats over her holiday decorations. Even Mr. Carter, previously frozen with fear, stepped forward, shaking but honest. I allowed myself to be coerced, he admitted, voice breaking, but I see now how wrong it was. I support removing her from power. Karen tried to interject, her voice rising with false authority. This is all exaggerated, you don't know what you're voting on. But the room no longer listened to her. She had lost the trust that had sustained her. Every story, every piece of evidence, every brave confession chipped away at her authority. When the votes were finally cast, the tally was undeniable. 52 in favor of removing Karen, 1 against. A collective sigh of relief filled the room, but the air remained tense. Karen's face twisted in rage, her lips forming words she didn't dare say aloud. Phase 3. Even in victory, we knew she wasn't finished. The term had come up in Greg's warnings, whispered in the documents, and hinted at in her own erratic behavior. This wasn't just about HOA fines anymore. It was about escalation, and the next move would target something or someone much more vulnerable. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing it tightly. We did it, she said softly, her voice still laced with concern. We did, but she's not done, I replied, scanning the room. Our neighbors were smiling, some laughing nervously, but beneath it all was fear, the kind of fear that doesn't go away overnight. Karen stormed out, slamming the doors behind her, leaving the hall buzzing with whispers about what Phase 3 might mean. Even from a distance, I could sense the darkness she carried and unresolved threat lingering over us. Ready to strike at the first opportunity, Ray caught up with us in the parking lot, his expression grim. Phase 3 targets schools, he said, lowering his voice. Public places, vulnerable people. We need to prepare. If she's willing to escalate this far, she won't stop at neighborhood politics. I nodded, feeling the weight of the next battle settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just about reclaiming control of an HOA anymore, it was about protecting my wife, my neighbors, and even the children in our community. Karen had been stripped of official authority, but her reach, that was still very real, and Phase 3 was coming. We left the hall with a mix of relief and dread, knowing that while we'd won the vote, the real fight was just beginning. We didn't have long to celebrate. Less than 24 hours after Karen was ousted, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a normal number. The message made my blood run cold. Your wife works at Sunset Elementary, right? Kids are vulnerable at 3:15 dismissal. A friend. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. Not just Sarah, not just our home. Now innocent kids were potentially in the crosshairs. I called Sarah immediately. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. We've dealt with Karen's theatrics before. We can handle this, she said. But I knew it would take more than courage to protect the school. Ray was the first person I contacted. We've got a serious escalation, I told him. Phase 3, target, Sunset Elementary. Could be kids, could be staff. We don't know exactly what she's planning. He didn't flinch, not the type to panic. We'll mobilize. Neighbors, volunteers, anyone we can trust. But this is beyond HOA nonsense. We're talking security measures now, law enforcement included. I spent the next hour coordinating with Sarah and Ray. Neighbors offered their surveillance cameras, even plans to stand guard during pickup. Everyone was scared, yes, but they were also determined. The same fear that had kept them silent for years now fueled action. At the school, I met with the principal and the security team. We went over every entrance, every blind spot, every hallway that could be exploited. The administration was cooperative, but the tension was palpable. Teachers whispered in corners about strange people loitering outside, and parents had started calling in. Worried. Greg contacted me again. This time, in person, he limped into the school parking lot, folder in hand. I've dug into her communications, he said, eyes sharp. She's been planning this for months. Phase 3 isn't random. She wants visibility, she wants fear, and she has resources, people willing to follow orders without question. I frowned. People like the 2 idiots yesterday. Worse, Greg said. She's coordinated with others in the area. Some are professionals, some are wannabes, but all are dangerous if underestimated. Sarah and I went over evacuation plans with the school staff, marking escape routes, assigning teachers to specific posts, and reviewing emergency contacts. Every minute counted. Mr. Carter, trembling, confessed how Karen had pressured him into false testimony before, admitting that she had promised to forgive his $2,500 debt if he cooperated. His credibility cracked, and the courtroom shifted. Karen's confident posture began to crumble. Finally, Greg testified, describing Karen's long pattern of controlling behavior, the payments to outside groups, and the planning behind Phase 3. His Marine background added weight to his words. He wasn't just a witness. He was someone who had seen her manipulations firsthand and understood the stakes. Karen's face went pale. Her eyes darted nervously around the room. Every attempt to maintain composure failed. She shouted once, "This is a setup. You're all conspiring against me?" But the courtroom remained calm, focused on the evidence. As the final document was handed over digital traces, linking Karen to the threat against Sarah's school, her collapse was almost theatrical. She screamed about being framed, her voice cracking, but no one believed her anymore. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to intimidate had been exposed. I sat back, exhaustion settling over me. Sarah leaned against me, whispering, "It's over, isn't it?" I didn't answer immediately, watching Karen being ordered to stand, the judge detailing fines, probation, and restrictions. Justice was being served, and not violently, not dramatically, but meticulously, the way truth always prevails when you arm it with facts. Karen's reign was over, and the first real sense of relief since the nightmare began settled over the courtroom. Phase 3 had been stopped before it could start. The courthouse emptied slowly, leaving a hushed tension in the air. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the gravity of what had just happened sink in. Karen's threats, and the looming danger of Phase 3 had finally been addressed. Justice had been served, but the scars, both physical and psychological, would linger a while. Sarah squeezed my hand gently. "It feels surreal," she whispered. Her cheek was still slightly bruised, but the determination in her eyes had never wavered. All those people watching, all the evidence. It actually worked. The judge's sentencing was precise. Karen was given 18 months probation, $8,000 in restitution to the victims, 200 hours of community service, a mandatory mental health evaluation, and a lifetime ban from holding any HOA position. Hearing those words aloud felt like a weight lifting from our shoulders. For the first time in months, it seemed the nightmare might truly be over. Outside, the crowd had gathered, neighbors who had been silent witnesses to Karen's reign of terror now openly sharing smiles and relieved laughter. Mrs. Porter came over. Her binder finally closed, the burden of years of documentation lifted from her shoulders. "We did it," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "We actually did it." Even Mr. Carter appeared, humbled and apologetic. He approached me quietly, eyes cast downward. "I'm sorry for how I acted," he murmured. "I let fear control me, and I didn't stand up sooner. I want to help rebuild the HOA now." I nodded, acknowledging his sincerity. "It's not too late to do the right thing. Help us make this neighborhood safe and fair again." The neighborhood, once paralyzed by fear, was slowly waking up. Conversations no longer hushed, laughter returned to porches, and homeowners cautiously reasserted their sense of freedom. The flags that had been points of contention now flew proudly, not as symbols of compliance, but as symbols of regained autonomy. Karen's house sat dark, a stark contrast to the vibrant activity around it. A sold sign had appeared out front, and her ankle monitor, an uncomfortable reminder of her failed attempts at control, glimmered under the afternoon sun. Even in absence, she remained a cautionary tale. Greg showed up later that afternoon, limping slightly but grinning. "Poetic justice," he said, glancing at Karen's empty driveway. "She thought she could manipulate everyone and get away with it now. Her reach is gone." I chuckled softly, the tension finally easing from my shoulders. And yet, she tried so hard to plan Phase 3. Lucky for us, the neighborhood stayed vigilant. Sarah leaned against me, eyes scanning the yard where our children played. "Think we'll finally get normal drama now?" she asked, a small smirk tugging at her lips. I shook my head, smiling. With our neighbors, never, but at least now, it's on our terms. Even as new families moved in, trucks loaded with security cameras and cautious optimism, the sense of vigilance remained. The lesson was clear. A community united could withstand intimidation, harassment, and even orchestrated attacks. We'd survived Karen's manipulations and Phase 3 threat, and now we had the tools and the courage to protect each other. That evening, as the sun set behind the palm trees, Sarah and I stood by the sprinklers in our backyard, watching the rainbows form in the spray. It was a small, perfect moment of peace. The nightmare of HOA, tyranny, assaults, and threats was behind us. For now, our flag flew high, a symbol not just of compliance or rules, but of freedom, justice, and resilience. We had won. The neighborhood was ours again, and though I knew challenges would come, the strength we had built together always stands. Sitting in our backyard that evening, I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. The sprinklers caught the light, casting tiny rainbows across the freshly mowed lawn. For the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of calm settle over me. Karen's reign of control was finally over. Phase 3 had been stopped before it could harm anyone, and justice had been served not through brute force, but through careful planning, evidence, and the courage of an entire community. Sarah leaned against me, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, though her eyes scanned the yard, alert as ever. I smiled, pressing my hand over hers. "For now, But with people like Karen out there, there's always a chance someone else will try to manipulate or intimidate. That's why vigilance matters. That's why we stick together. The neighborhood had changed. Neighbors once afraid to speak now laughed freely, shared stories, and helped one another. Flags waved without fear of fines. Cameras and security systems were more than just precautions. They were symbols of a community united. We had reclaimed our streets, our homes, and our sense of safety. Even with Karen gone, the lessons lingered. Fear thrives in silence, and tyranny can take root when people stop paying attention. But I had seen what happened when ordinary people chose courage over compliance, action over resignation. It was powerful. It was transformative, as dusk gave way to night. I thought of the children playing in the yard, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. They deserved safety, freedom, and the reassurance that grown-ups would protect them. And that's what we had done. I stood, brushing off my jeans, and looked around at the neighborhood. New families were moving in, trucks loaded with optimism, and perhaps a few security cameras, ready to join a community that had learned resilience firsthand. Sarah's laugh rang out as she called our kids in from the sprinkler's spray. For a moment, everything felt normal again, peaceful, warm, and entirely ours. Life would bring challenges. Of course. There would be disagreements, minor conflicts, and perhaps even new threats. But after everything we'd faced, the assaults, the lies, the harassment, and the looming Phase 3, we had proven something crucial. Together, we could endure, protect, and prevail. As darkness settled over the palm-lined streets, I took a deep breath. Justice had been served, the neighborhood restored, and our family intact. Karen's shadow had faded, leaving space for freedom, laughter, and hope. And while the world might always hold its share of manipulators and tyrants, tonight, for our little corner of Florida, Victorian safety belonged to us. We'd fought hard, and we'd won. But above all, we'd learned that vigilance, courage, and unity were the true guardians of a community. And as I watched the sprinklers cast their final shimmering rainbows across the lawn, I knew we were ready for whatever came next.